A few more items. Installability. Is the install experience clear and concise? Right. These are a lot of carryovers from traditional software testing. Use the App Store to distribute your app whenever possible. Get it in the Google Marketplace. Notification of upgrades I just mentioned. Can you notify the user by multiple means? Not only through the marketplace, but maybe on your own if there's an upgrade available. Are compatible OS devices clearly marked? So in your marketplace, if you're not supporting on a particular device and can't stop it from showing up there, make sure you note it. Accessibility. This is for some people. If you want your application to support people with disabilities, okay, there are various accessibility options available in the development SDK for Android as well as the other mobile platforms. Credibility, very important and often overlooked. Is the data presented accurate, right? Functionally, you may believe the application is doing what it's supposed to do, right? I'm writing an application that calculates my monthly mortgage payment, right? And I enter my, principal and I enter my interest rate and I hit calculate and it tells me how much each month, right? But I didn't notice that, it's adding a 0.5 variance to whatever mortgage rate I enter, interest rate I enter, right? The developer had put 0.5 plus in there for some testing he was doing and forgot to remove it. So it looked like it was accurate because I tried different values and it gave me different results, but did you actually do the calculation manually and make sure it works, right? If the info isn't accurate, it impacts your credibility. So make sure that what it's doing, being presented is accurate for the user and makes sense for what they want. And then finally, this is a touchy subject for me, which is what we call user emotions. Don't bug the user, right? You want an application that does what it's supposed to do and doesn't constantly come up and tell the user. Nothing annoys me more than an application that every half hour pops up and tells me something's going on the screen, right? We have the notification bar, which you can use to present notifications to the user, but don't put a pop-up on my screen every time there's a new news article, right? Unless you offer a setting to turn those things off, okay? So be aware, users don't necessarily like to be bugged, constantly. You can present updates in, in more discreet ways to keep them from being bothered by your application. Now, there may be cases where you have to. If there's a critical issue or something, right, you may have to notify the user right away.
Frank, question on use App Store to distribute.
Yes.
How do you support Amazon App Store? If you post an application in Google,
Very good. Yes.
automatically get
No. So for those not familiar, the Amazon App Store is Amazon's equivalent or competition to the Google App Store. If you have a Kindle Fire device, which is based on the Android OS, we have one up here if anyone wants to see it later, the Amazon App Store is the only available one. Google App Store is only available on devices that have been quote-unquote licensed through Google. You have to license your device with Google to get access to the Google libraries, one of which is the Google App Store, right? I don't know how much it is now, but when you were buying a lot of cheap devices a year or two ago, they were missing the App Store. Or they had like a third-party app store from the vendor, because those devices hadn't been licensed through Google. So Amazon came along and said, not only for our Kindle Fire, but for Android devices, we want to give them a competitor. Now, you can't get the Amazon App Store app through the Google Play, through the Play Store. I'm curious if they've ever tried, and Google just said, no, that's not happening. Or if they, just said, no, we're not going to bother. So you go to Amazon's website, you submit an email request, it emails you the link, you download the app. It's a competitor for the Google Store. You have to file a different process for getting your application on the Amazon Marketplace. So you have to submit it to both. Amazon does have a review process, so that's interesting. Google Play doesn't, Amazon does. Amazon does review your app, so it usually takes about a week. And if you're submitting your app as compatible with the Kindle device, Kindle Fire, there's a separate review process that has to go for the application to be approved for the Kindle. So one of the things Amazon has going for it on its app store is they give a free app every day. Okay, so I think the first day the App Store launched was with the release of Angry Birds Rio. So the first day the App Store came out, they said Angry Birds Rio, a $5 app is free. So I must have 150 apps on my phone just for every day I remember to go in. Am I ever going to use it? Probably not, but go ahead, I'll take it. It's free, right? And then later on, you're clicking all these apps off your phone. Amazon gives a free app every day. I don't know how they choose the free app every day and how that works, if you automatically get considered for it or not. I've only ever submitted free apps to the Amazon Marketplace, so obviously they're not going to make a free app the free app of the day without getting some flack. But just know it's a separate marketplace you can submit to. There,
Was Google contemplating going against that? They wanted to make sure that everything goes to clear. There's an issue there.
yeah, so I think the problem is that being an open source OS, they can't really control it, right? Amazon designed the Kindle without Google's backing or help, right? The Kindle Fire was designed without Google, one on their own, right? So when you have an open source OS, you can't really, stop someone from doing that. And the Android OS already provides channels for installing applications from other sources. There's an option that says, allow unknown sources, where you can go to any web URL and install an app. So I'm not sure Google could really stop them without putting some serious controls and restrictions around.
Do that. That's the reason why they launched the Play.
Yes.
Earlier it was.
Yeah. So I think that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to encourage people to come back. If you notice the Play Market, they have a lot of stuff like they have the 49-cent apps of the day, right? They're trying their, thing to try and fight back or whatever. I actually haven't looked at numbers recently to see. I know for the applications we have, a very small number of the downloads come from the Amazon App Store right now. I'd be curious to see how many people buy apps outside of just the free ones on the Amazon App Store. I was for a while supporting Amazon by downloading some of my apps from there, but then I started finding that the updates to applications, like if I wanted the new levels for Angry Birds or for Where's My Water, they were becoming available in the Play Store like 2-3 weeks before they were showing up in the Amazon Store. So there's, give and go on there, right? If the application's the same price in both stores, I mean, it's preference. What you want to know or get, and how often you expect updates. Amazon's getting better about that. Google added in-app purchases, right, to their applications a while ago, months ago. Amazon just got it in a month or so ago, where they were able to do in-app store purchases in their apps, right? So we know that Apple, I believe, entirely discourages in-app purchases or whatever. Or I think they have a library now which allows you to do in-app purchases so they can still get their cut, right? A lot of vendors will do that. They'll do the initial thing from the marketplace so they get their cut, and then they want the in-app purchases. On iOS, you can't write your own app store and put it in marketplace. They won't let you. You can't download an application. It gives that, even if it's like an enterprise app store, you can't do that. You have to find creative ways around that. And of course on iOS, installing from unknown sources is pretty much not possible unless you're jailbroken. So, again, example of how Apple is much more strict. The flexibility of Android and the Google OS allows more in terms of being able to do that. So, okay. So we're going to talk about tools to aid in mobile application testing, particularly Android. Okay. One of the first biggest tools are emulators. Has anyone here run the Google Android SDK before? I know some of the guys have, so everyone's kind of familiar. So we'll go a little bit over this. So emulators are available for all major platforms. Oops, looks like this slide has a little bit of an issue. I apologize on that. Go to the next one. Here we go. The Google Android SDK has multiple tools available to it, which can allow us to modify, test, work with devices that are connected to the actual phone. So one of the things is the Android SDK Manager. This is where you actually download any necessary image files or updates to the SDK library. Okay, I'll show you guys that in a minute. Then there's the AVD Manager, which is the Android Virtual Device Manager. This is where you configure and run your actual Android virtual devices on your Mac or PC or Linux box, so you can actually simulate some items with it. There's ADB, which is the Android Debug Bridge. It's a command line tool which is useful for installing apps to AVDs. It can be used to gather logs. We'll talk about that in a minute. There are programs called Monkey and Monkey Runner, which are some basic tools. I haven't used these a lot. I've tried them out that you can use to simulate user actions on a device and do some automation around them. They're limited. And then there's SQLite 3, which will allow you to access databases created on it. So those are the main tools that can help from a testing perspective in the Google SDK. There are many other tools available in there as well that you can look at and see, but these are the most common ones. I also provided a list here of the common and helpful commands for ADB. ADB devices, list connected devices. The good news is once you run an emulator, it shows up in ADB as if it's actually a physical device. ADB logcat can be used to start capturing logs. So you can do ADB logcat and then the name of a file. Or if you just do ADB logcat, it'll put it right to the screen. You can redirect to a file. There's also options for filtering. So if you only want to log capture your application's logs, you can do the command escapes me offhand, but it's in the helpline, where you can put a command line option to only filter for specific application names or whatever. ADB install allows you to install APKs to the device. So someone says, before I submit it to market, how can I get my apps on the device? There's two ways that I recommend. One is you can use ADB install. Another way, which I'm a big fan of, is you take your application, you point it to a Dropbox link. You go in a web browser on your device, you point to that Dropbox link. Hey, you want to install this app? Yes, I do. The only thing you got to make sure is that you have that option for enable unknown sources enabled on your device. Okay. ADB shell, I heard some people talking about this prior to the talk today, allows you to open like a Linux shell on the device and execute commands. It's not everything, right, because the OS is locked down, but you can execute some high-level commands on there, file browsing, deleting files, opening files in areas that you're allowed, some basic performance stats. And then ADB start server, kill server. Generally, you don't have to use these unless you're having a problem. The server will start automatically the first time you use it, but if something's going on and it's just not behaving right, you can kill the ADB server and restart it. Okay, so I do have on my desktop both for those who haven't seen it, the SDK manager and the AVD manager open so we can see. So when you open the SDK manager, and it's very similar on PC and Windows, PC there'll be shortcut links in the program files. On Mac and Windows. On Mac, I have to start them from a terminal session. I'm sure there's ways shortcuts it and whatever if you want to create icons. But you'll see basically this is your platform for downloading SDKs, right? Developers should be very familiar with this. Some QA guys are, some aren't. And Google, every time Google releases the source code and dev tools for an OS, they actually release the platform. So if we minimize these windows, you'll see here's all the different Android platforms that have been available. 4.03, 4.0, 3.2, 3.1, 3.0, all the way back for each major release they've done, and some extra stuff. And one of the good things they changed about this recently is that third-party companies, hardware vendors and all, who design their own add-ons or whatever, actually show up in this list now too. I'll give you a primary example. If we go to 233 here, Samsung has some, but this is my favorite, Motorola. Motorola, whenever they release a new device, create a complete skin and copy of the OS. So I have one on my screen right now. I don't know if it's finished loading or not. Oh, yes, it did. Good. This is the Motorola Zoom 2 device. So you see it's actually got the Motorola skin. I know it's a little hard to see on there.
Is it the device?
Yes. It's the Zoom 2 device. You see they even got the little rounded edges and all. So you can actually download and be actually looking at the phone, and it'll automatically configure the emulator with the specs that match that device. What's the processor being simulated? What's the memory? What's the onboard storage? Default SD card. So you can see these things in an interactive one. We'll come back to the emulator in a minute. Okay, but I want to show you guys that. So that's one of the cool things I like about the Motorola is when they release a new phone, there's their Bionic, their Atrix 2. All their different ones. Here's a Sony Xperia one that they did, a Photon phone. So Motorola Droid Pro. So I only have a couple of them downloaded right now. But you could see that you could actually download the skins and the configurations of the Motorola phones. They say it's an equivalent of running the True OS. I don't buy it. If this was the actual True OS for the Motorola phone, I would see the marketplace in there, and it's not. And there's a reason for that. The emulators can't license putting the marketplace and certain Google features in there. For instance, if you want to configure a Google account on your phone, you can't do that with the Motorola's. The good news is the Google versions, Google has two versions for each one. So if I open up Android 3.2 here, let me find one. I got to find one that has this. I'm sorry, we'll see that when we open up the AVD. We'll see that. We'll be able to see that. But here you can see 3.0. There was the Zoom 1. I don't have it installed. So basically what you do is if you want to create an AVD or develop against a certain version, you have to download the appropriate libraries for that. There's also things in here for like the phones that support 3D. There's the 3D libraries for developing on 3D phones. All those things are in here. So the Android SDK manager is where you download these SDKs, tools, utilities, images, and all for creating devices. Okay.
So each folder is having the emulator image as well as the APIs.
Yes, what it does is it has the SDK platform, all the APIs, and then any third-party stuff available for it. So if I want to be able to create Android virtual devices based on 3.0, I have to make sure I've downloaded the SDK platform, okay, and the Google APIs. Now, when you open up the second part, I'm sorry, was there another question?